Greetings, and welcome to The World According to Pleiades on KFUG Radio in Crescent City, California, 101.1 FM. The 1-hour weekly radio program that covers everything from alternative medicine, hypnosis, meditation, success, human interaction, alien abduction, and the question of, what is reality anyway, to name but a few. To quickly recap a small portion of who DonDep is, for those of you that may be joining us for the first time. Don Depler, a.k.a. DonDep, successful bank robber, self-identified revolutionary, once accused of being a spy for East Germany, lead singer and bass player for the first American band to perform in Kazakhstan. DonDep has also investigated the infamous MJ-12 along with interviewing Dan Burish of the same organization, and as such has been the subject of CIA probes and will undoubtedly be under surveillance for the rest of his life. And welcome back to Don Depler. I think this is our 7th or 8th interview. First, I want to say welcome back and thank you again for taking time from your busy schedule to be with us here on The World According to Pleiades.
Well, thank you for having me, Pleiades, and it is the 7th time that we've had this conversation, so I appreciate the opportunity as always, I'm glad to be here.
Well, you're quite welcome. So, how long has it been? It's been quite a while since we've interacted last. I'm figuring you've got a lot of updates and new information for us. Don, where would you like to begin? What's been going on?
Well, I think the last time that we talked, the Jade Helm military exercises were going on, and I was down in Florida. I took some pictures of the Walmart that was closed down there that's being made over into a reception center for the expected flood of refugees that were expected to come up from Central America, South America, and Mexico. However, that didn't take place as was expected, so in the intervening year or so, actually, I think it has been almost that long, I have finished up with my adventures down in Florida, for the most part. Mm-hmm. Some of them are still outstanding, and I won't get into the details about that. Those are more of a personal nature. Mm. But in the larger scope of things, it appears that the country has come under a form of synthetic martial law. And that we endured a very quiet and silent coup d'etat headed up by a collection of generals and admirals. At the head of this group was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dunford, General Joseph Dunford. And this was a shock to me when I discovered that this had happened, and this had actually been corroborated by a number of sources within the alternative news community, some of which your listeners probably are already aware of, but these are sources that I had never really given much credence to, because for the most part I was relying on my own sources that unfortunately may have met an untimely demise, and I think I mentioned that in our last interview. So I do feel bad about that. I still do and always will, but as I'm coming to learn of these other sources that are actually trying to alert the public, realizing and taking into account that not everything they have to say is completely credible, I've had to piece together this new reality, which was prompted by, allegedly now, this is all allegation, of course, because we don't have that much insight into the actual technical specifics of it. But supposedly, our illustrious Commander-in-Chief, who was, again, allegedly, the soul of Abraham Lincoln, incarnated within the body of one Barack Hussein Obama at age 19, in order to carry out this mission, he lost his courage, and that soul has gone on and been removed. But allegedly, he couldn't pull the trigger for the major announcement of all time last September, which is when Jade Helm was supposed to culminate, and the announcements, both admitting to the presence of Nibiru in the inner solar system, as well as the fact that the U.S. government and other governments of the world have been interacting with extraterrestrials regarding this singular event, heralding the pole shift. He just couldn't do it. So this is what we've been told, and he has experienced a remarkable change in demeanor. Most folks listening will probably think back and think to themselves, well, this is awfully strange that things are a little bit different with this man now, and he's embraced what I call a thief, a vote thief, because most listeners who are familiar with the political process, if they were watching, and no matter what camp they were in, whether they were supporters of Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, Jill Stein, Gary Johnson, Hillary Clinton, they should be able to see that there had been a lot of theft and a lot of fraud, especially in California. It was just in your face and so blatant that it was so hard to avoid, and now we've seen that come out in all the WikiLeaks leaks, and there's just endless leaks that are coming. There's, in fact, the more of them that happened today. So that's what has been happening in the intervening time, is that supposedly President Obama didn't have the courage, and so in January they made it official, and General Dunford took over the reins of the operation of the new republic of the country, because Mr. Obama was actually a CEO of the United States corporation, not necessarily the president of the United States government, but simply the head of the corporation that runs the United States. Anyway, this is a very important distinction to be made between the head of the corporation and the actual leader of the republic. So nobody wants this to come out in the open, because they don't want the panic that would be associated with such a move. I mean, a military coup d'etat, even though it was suggested in that movie about the 7 Days of May or something, back when JFK was president, and he was even interested in that concept so much that he lent the personal resources of the White House to help the filmmakers produce that movie, and he felt that it could very well happen. And here, I think we've actually gone through such a thing, this coup d'état.
And I just want to throw out there, and feel free to comment on this at any time, or not at all, if you so desire. As you know, the format of our interviews are just really whatever moves you in the moment to speak of. American politics, especially the presidential elections, for years, okay, but it's like we've stepped into a more insane space than ever. This whole Trump versus Hillary thing. I mean, it's beyond Saturday Night Live. I mean, it seems to me that it's geared for just pure and massive distraction. How do you feel about that?
Actually, I think that there's something to be said for that. In fact, it is. Normally, our elections take place between forces of the right versus the forces of the left. And in general terms, the forces of the left are those that are oriented towards community and what's good for the larger group and unity and making things better for the average person, etc. And the forces of the right, let's look at their positive ideals, would be rugged individualism and bringing out the best in the individual and liberty and freedom and so forth. And both of the sides, both right and left, are valid, but the actual controllers of our reality, of this matrix, the establishment, let's just call it what it is the establishment, has always made sure that no matter who was going to run the race for the right and who was going to run the race for the left, that they were both pretty much validated and vetted by the majority of the people on either side, who chose to take A or B, right or left, Tweedledee or Tweedledum, and that either one would be acceptable, and that no matter who it was, they would play the game the normal way and say what the public would want to hear on the teleprompter, and they would have some margin of discretion to enact their own pet legislation, although, of course, the president never enacts the legislation. He only can validate or vet what the Congress provides him to do. But this election is so much more different. It isn't necessarily the right versus left, because now you have a candidate who is very, very rich, who ostensibly is not the tool of the establishment, used to be part of it, and knows what is going to happen or what could happen, and has taken it upon himself to try to gain the power and not to adhere to the dictates of the establishment, but to actually do the kind of things that he knows, and they all know, would be helpful to the common man. And it is not a globalist agenda at all. And for this reason, this is a threat. And so what is happening is that the establishment, which represents the 1% that controls the media, the 6 companies that control the media are all in on this, and that's why the mainstream media is trying to make it seem as if the election of Hillary Clinton, who is their chosen puppet this time, is simply inevitable, because the buffoonery on the other side is so much so that we can't trust him. So this is the narrative that they have been drumming up, but they really are, in fact, very much afraid of Donald Trump. If the actual votes of the people would have counted, Bernie Sanders would have gotten the nomination running away with it. But that's not the actual purpose of American elections. He unleashed a tiger by its tail, and unfortunately wasn't able to handle it, because as a result of doing that, he was essentially called to heel. And sadly, we watched as he bought the $600,000 home in one of those islands just north of Vermont, and he's basically on his way out and retiring, and he's playing the game the way they want him to, because his only other choice is to have his grandchildren accidentally drowned or murdered, and other things happen to his family. This is what they do. They offer you a carrot and a stick. Usually most people go with the program because there's there's no other choice. So, yes, this political season, it's not the usual type of political season where the forces of the right are arrayed against the forces of the left. Not at all. And you have this weird, like you said, Saturday Night Live is a good analogy, where you have the bottom is being represented by somebody at the top, and the top is being represented by somebody at the bottom. The 1% versus the 99%. That's really what it comes down to. And the guy that's supposed to be championing the people looks like one of the richest, most flagrantly ostentatious, grandiose braggarts of all time. He's like a Napoleonic caricature of himself. He really is. And in many ways it is entertainment, and he knows that. I'm speaking of Mr. Trump now.
Of course.
And on the other side, the Clintons are not very well liked by so many in the Democratic Party. I don't even consider it to be the Democratic Party now that's running Hillary Clinton. I consider it to be the establishment. And I feel that sadly, the Democratic Party is in a state of cryogenics at the moment, while this caricature of a leftist candidate is going out there and practicing the division of identity politics in order for the establishment to maintain their control and to put forth their globalist agenda as we descend into the state of relative chaos that we're expected to descend into once these earth changes begin to truly manifest.
Okay, and
full stop.
And how, if you feel it's connected at all, do you feel that this present sideshow of American politics with the distraction fits into the longer term plan relating to Nibiru and so on and so forth?
Instead of focusing their attention on some of the earth changes that have now become so commonplace as to become almost a fact of life, where you can have a landslide that will kill hundreds, or like today, we have these moderate quakes that are beginning to happen in more populated areas and killing handfuls of people here and there. And they're barely even mentioned because the political, this titanic struggle between the establishment attempting to maintain its control, which they are desperate to maintain that control. This is why they're pulling out all the stops, because if they don't win this, win one last one for the Jipper, they may face a situation in which they will not have control over their puppet. Therefore, the forces that they have been relying upon, such as the U.S. military, and as I pointed out, the Jade Helm issue is exactly a prime example. That was basically an attempt to create an environment in which it was commonplace to see soldiers and so forth and to have an effective form of martial law because it's a military exercise, and then with the announcement coming through as it was expected to do, people would already be used to having their daily lives controlled by being able to go to the supermarket when and they wanted to, and being able to travel on the highways and byways when they wanted to, with relatively little restriction. So the establishment is getting desperate, and part of that involves their control of the masses through the currency situation. And unfortunately, the currency, the U.S. dollar, is losing the power that it once had due to the increasing use of other currencies, such as the euro, for example. Here's a perfect example of how this plays out. In the recent week, we've seen, or 2 weeks ago, I think, recently, the administration was caught sending a plane full of euros, full of cash, over to Iran to fulfill a treaty obligation. And they had to send cash. And not only that, they had to send the cash in euros, from what I understand. This was a result of, even Obama made a joke about this. Well, we can't give them a check because we don't have any relationships with them, so it's not that easy. Well, actually, they could have done just that. They would have been able to do that in a form of exchange through European banks if they had to do it. But the point of it is that the U.S. dollar is supposedly going to go through a reset. This was another reason why the currency situation, vis-a-vis the control of the military through General Dunford, was one of the first things that came to my attention earlier this year when one of the, the more outspoken alternative news commentators, Karen Hudis. Many of the audience will probably be aware of who she is. She was the chief legal counsel for the World Bank for a period of time. She worked as legal counsel in general for the World Bank for over 20 years, and she became what is known as whistleblower. And she put out a video, as she's been doing. In January, she referred to General Dunford as being in control. She was one of the first to mention this, and I thought that was laughable, because there was certainly nothing in the regular media about it, and even in the alternative media, there was nothing about it. So she mentions the currency reset, that it has to take place, and General Dunford has to approve of this. Well, one of the things that the general has done, and this is something I may have mentioned in my last interview with you, and that is he took over the Federal Reserve website. The Federal Reserve, as we've talked about before, and most people intelligent enough to look into this kind of thing are already aware that the Federal Reserve is not a federal agency, and that all of the interest that is paid on the national debt is, in effect, profit for the banking families. I think it's a consortium of 5 banks that actually controls the Federal Reserve. And that is essentially the establishment's power. They suck all of the profit off of the productivity off of the American people through the use of the Federal Reserve printing fiat money, and then the U.S. government being obliged to pay back in real terms against those notes, which are essentially debt. And the whole banking thing is an imbroglio I don't want to go into, but I can refer to it as I am here because it does have an impact on our perception of the military, our perception of the political process. And in this particular case, the general sent teams of Marines, allegedly, into the 12 Federal Reserve banks sometime late last year and took over the Federal Reserve and, in effect, nationalized it. And that's why when you go to the Federal Reserve website, you'll see that it's no longer a federalreserve.org. It is now a .gov operation. And .gov means that it adheres to the strictures and requirements of an official U.S. government institution. So anyone that wants to check that out can verify by going to federalreserve.gov, and they'll no longer see that it is a .org operation. It is indeed a U.S. government operation. So now that the Federal Reserve is in effect nationalized and the bankers are no longer in full control as they used to be and being able to get away with doing what they wanted fiscally with our economy, they are, in effect, circling the wagons, and this is why you see the Bush family join publicly with their partners in crime behind the scenes, the Clinton crime family, and it really is the Bush-Clinton crime cabal that has run the U.S. economy and essentially its society, like Tweedledee, Tweedledum back and forth for the past generation or so.
And I would
anyway,
say,
does that give you a better idea?
I wonder where you see China in all this.
China is actually playing a very coy game, and they're not to be. Well, they have their own interest in all of this, and if I bring up one of the sources now that has been admitted to as being truthful at least 40% of the time, and I've had discussions about this with other truth seekers and even Nancy Leader. I've discussed it with her, and it was her that I brought to the attention of the fact that General Dunford was supposed to be allegedly now in power, and they confirmed it. And Ben Fulford is one of those sources that has said that indeed General Dunford took over operational command of the United States government around January 21st of this year, with various and sundry different responsibilities that he went on to assume control of as the spring commenced. But China is a major player, and apparently, according to Ben Fulford, these Chinese elders, the White Dragon Society, and again, this is allegedly, because I'm not going to go out and say this is definitively the truth, but allegedly these Chinese elders that are members of this Chinese secret society, the White Dragons, the White Hats, I'll just call them that for now, they were the ones that insisted that the currency that the United States uses in their dealings, and essentially the United States dollar must be backed with gold. This is the big deal, supposedly, with China. And China has started on this path because when they began buying up a lot of U.S. Treasury bonds, in effect, helping to prop up their number one customer so that we would continue to buy products made by their masses and thereby ensure prosperity for their people, they discovered that the payments that were being made, and they insisted on actual gold payments, which allegedly were taken from Fort Knox, but in the first instance that they had demanded gold as a payment, they inspected the gold bars they received, and again, this is allegedly, when they were in London in the transaction. After the transaction, 2 holes in one of the bars were drilled, and they noticed, I think, the drill holes, but they found out that these gold bars were really tungsten. They had been hollowed out and or filled gold-plated tungsten because they have the same atomic weight as gold. And then they realized that they had essentially been made fools of, that we'd been paying them off in tungsten. And they were thinking they were gold bars. Well, there's a lot of back and forth, and it's not my place to get into the details of the gold wars, but supposedly there was a submarine that was controlled and operated by the Kissinger Associates Consortium. And if it's not the Kissinger Associates Consortium, it's the Carlyle Group, which is headed by, or at least populated by, members of the Bush-Clinton crime cabal, specifically George H.W. Bush, or Poppy Bush as he's known, George Sr., and the submarine was bringing gold out of one of the mines that's been under the control of the establishment ever since the end of World War II, when General MacArthur took it upon himself to make a pit stop on his way to Tokyo and reassert his family's control of the Philippines. This is one of the main reasons, by the way, that the Philippines were such a pivotal point in the Second World War, both at the outset and then when we regained control of the Pacific militarily, because that's where all the gold mines, or a lot of the gold mines, were. This is another reason why Ferdinand Marcos, the dictator of the Philippines, was propped up by the U.S., because he was in control and he was a full member of the consortium with knowledge of what was going on at the control of the gold. But anyway, the submarine carrying some of this gold from one of the larger mines there was trying to transport that gold elsewhere. And again, I don't know the details because this is not my forte, but the fact that there was so much James Bond type of activity that's been going on, there's so much drama going on behind the scenes. And of course, the audience is not aware of most of this unless they keep their ear to the ground, because of the major media is only going to distract you with the Trump-Hillary contest, again, to get back to that. But the main deal is getting the gold under the control of the rightful powers that be, because now that the United States military is essentially working for the good and no longer working to do the bidding of the establishment's private armies are having to do a lot of this kind of thing now, because General Dunford just doesn't. From what I understand, he wants to make sure that he is a working partner, a trusted partner of the Chinese and the good guys in China, that is, even though publicly they still have to make their stands about how the military have to make sure that the South China sea lanes remain open for the free passage of the ships of the Philippines and Vietnam and the Japanese and the Koreans, etc. But it's really the gold that is the heart of their interest, and the control of that gold is very important. And supposedly, the currency reset that is being talked about, that was supposed to be happening, every day it's going to happen the next day, or it's already happened and it's going to be announced publicly. That's one of the last things I remember reading. Nothing has really happened, at least publicly. But they are trying to position everything so that when the time comes and the announcement is made apparent that the United States Treasury notes that are going to be replacing the Federal Reserve notes, will be backed by real gold. And that's why they're trying to make sure that they're retaining power, that the U.S. military will actually control the gold once again that will be necessary to back up those notes. And unfortunately, a lot of foreign note holders of older Federal Reserve notes will probably be left holding the bag. But then again, they didn't usually acquire those holdings through legitimate methods, so nobody should be crying any tears over the loss of millions of dollars by the oligarchs that basically run the rest of the world.
Well, Don,
so essentially, to answer your question, it's the gold.
Okay, so gold has been a really big deal for a really long time, and we've brought up the name Nibiru a few times already. As far as Nibiru is concerned, gold is also a very big deal. The name comes up, and earth changes come up, and catastrophes, and this and that. Would you care to elaborate a little bit on what is Nibiru, what that is about, and what did I just mean when I said that it's all gold is also a big deal in relation to that, at least from some history that we've become aware of over time. And then at the same time, just to throw a whole bunch of stuff at you at once, the affairs of men with their circus and their sideshows will be small and insignificant in relation to a much larger and more ancient power. What is your comment on any or all of that?
Most excellent segue into the connection of Nibiru with gold. If any of your listeners are aware of the story of Nibiru, then they probably are aware of the fact that the inhabitants of Nibiru, known as the Anunnaki, had originally settled on Earth to mine the gold here on this planet, and they're still doing it on Phobos, the moon of Mars, which is then used to create a fine powder they seed their atmosphere with, because every time they make that long circuit around our sun, a lot of it gets ripped away, a lot of the atmosphere gets ripped away when it comes closer to the sun and as it heads out of the solar system. So there's been a long-standing connection between Nibiru, gold, and Earth. Nibiru needs gold to keep their atmosphere going. And this is why the gold has always been so important, not only to them, but the humans that they once controlled saw this and saw how important gold was, and made, essentially, that's when gold became the standard issue of barter. So that almost anything that you would want or need in terms of food, shelter, clothing, industry, or whatever, the method of payment is usually made in gold. So is it possible that the gold is being amassed in order to make some type of a deal with the inhabitants of Nibiru as it comes our way? It's always been interesting speculation on the part of a number of us as to whether that's really the agenda for the establishment, because they are desperate to do anything they can to avoid what's going to happen when the pole shift occurs. The pole shift has been scheduled and it's essentially built into the blueprint of our reality as a periodic, a cyclical point of graduation, soul harvest, when everything basically is house cleaning takes place. But that gold is going to be very important, and there may be a deal, or they may be thinking they can make a deal, because they found that they cannot get off planet. They're not allowed to go to Mars. They're not going to be allowed to go to the moon. And most of those deep underground military bases that they thought that they could hide in will be subject to tectonic plate movements, and many of them will be crushed. So they're going to have to ride this thing out just like the rest of us and be subject to the same type of scenarios involving the goodness or the badness, the selfishness of their individual soul. But it is a point of interest to consider that the gold is being amassed so that it can be used as a bargaining chip for the elite to get off planet and to avoid the effects of the Earth changes. But nonetheless, gold itself cannot be eaten. And as far as the average person should be concerned, because many of the people that think that they can make investments and that they can improve their lot simply by investing and buying an interest in the productivity of others without doing anything themselves, because that's essentially what hedge fund managers do. They spend all of their toil, all of their sweat and labor in these investment gains so that they can have a better exchange and suck off the productivity of the people who really should be the beneficiaries, the primary beneficiaries at least, of their labor, which they are not. And only a fraction of the people really control enough to make it worthwhile. So, having said that, the amassing of gold is not likely to make a difference in the grand scheme of things when the average person is going to be confronted with the fact that the money that he needs to exchange in order to eat and pay for his housing and so forth, it's not going to mean anything. But if there is a gold backing to it, at least there's going to be more confidence. And this is, I think, one of the key factors in the calculations of the establishment as they try to basically guarantee their position, so that when the total awareness of Nibiru is evident. And by the way, just for future reference, in a moment we should discuss this latest prong, which is that so many scientists are now talking about, as of a couple of days ago, rogue planets being able to wander through the stars and maintain life on them. So these scientific announcements that are basically setting the stage for the announcement come some of the solid, more critical cataclysmic Earth changes. When that reality becomes evident that there is such a thing as a rogue planet, and it is not only a possibility but a reality in our own environment, the people may panic, but if they know that their money is no longer fiat money, but essentially is backed by gold, there's going to be more trust and confidence, which the elite fear losing. So they are bracing for the after effects of the public becoming aware of Nibiru. And as they become aware and they worry about the validity of their currency, having the currency that can be said, this is real currency, it's finite, it's backed by gold. The new treasury notes I anticipate to be unveiled at about the same time. Now, this is another issue. I'm just going to deviate for a moment on this one, because it involves the use of political entities such as the BLM, or Black Lives Matter, where you have some of the billionaires who are concerned about losing their control over assets that are funding these operations to divide the people so that they can create conditions in which martial law may have to be called prematurely, as the National Guard was just called out in Wisconsin, and it will be used to essentially safeguard the elite's property and not necessarily the average person's property. But that is a key feature, a major factor in the preparations that the elite are making for the eventual and the soon to occur announcement or awareness of the fact that, yes, we're heading for a pole shift, and it's going to be happening fairly quickly, even though on the surface, not that much looks like it's changing, except for the big political circus going on. So yes, there's a connection there between gold, Nibiru, and the changeover, or the currency reset that we've been talking about around. Does that give you an answer to your question?
Yeah, totally. It's kind of amusing to me. Somebody may feel like they have power on the planet, and they may have power in the prison system, if you will, if we look at this as, a prison planet. If a more ancient civilization comes along, it's like, why do I even need to talk to the man in the tie? It's like, I control the planet. I can take what I want. Who are you? So it's kind of funny to me that some people might think that they can actually amass power here on this little speck of dust and actually be in a position where a more advanced civilization would actually need to address them and make notice of them to get anything done, when it would be a matter of, I'll take what I want, and if I decide to be nice, I will, but, really, who are you? Nice shoes, but give me the damn gold. I mean, Yes. Well, in fact, the soul guardians that watch over our matrix, our prison planet, and that's a very good analogy. I don't necessarily think that we are in prison here, but we could be one or the other. We are a battleground planet anyway. Schoolhouse, battlefield, battleground, a university, college, whatever it is, because we're essentially going through various scenarios of all types, in all types of relationships, in which the spiritual polarities are contending against each other. So it's almost like these guys that are in control of, the folks, the extraterrestrials, the out-of-towners, whatever you want to call them, they are watching us, and there are billions of them that are witnessing our little drama, our little soap opera, all the little different variations on it. As like worker bees, we're furiously expending our efforts in controlling these material resources, and it really is in how we relate to our other worker bees or worker ants. It's really like ants,
and then you see a couple of ants that are laboriously hauling a big crumb as another ant is snapping a whip at them, because the ant with the whip has figured out that if he can control a whip and gain access to a whip, he can therefore control a crumb, a bigger crumb that will require his less fortunate co-ants to have to carry for him, and then he will decide how much of that crumb he will divvy up between the ants that haul it for him. Mm-hmm. So it is kind of funny when you really think about it, but that is what's going on, is that as we mature on this planet, it's all about the acquisition of the material resources, none of which makes any difference in the overall scheme of things after we pass away from this existence. And then we come back and incarnate again, and in a totally different body, so we can learn different lessons. And then we go back to the same grind because we've lost the memory of all of this, but yet essentially the soul that has not lost its memory. But consciously we don't know that we've lived in a former life and this is what we were trying to do, and it's all really meaningless when it comes down to it. But we have to live as if it is our reality as to how we interact with our fellow beings in the constant attempt to acquire control. Constant attempt to acquire the gold and to acquire all the things that the gold will pay for, which is really what it comes down to, the kind of things that we need to live on. So, yes, you're absolutely right, but here again, the fabric of the illusion of control that the establishment maintains over us is becoming very frayed. It's a very thin and fragile thing. And we can see it being essentially ripping almost in front of our very eyes with the blatant election theft going on. And no one can deny that. So why are they so desperate that they don't even mention these things on the news? Why are they essentially lying and ignoring, major rips in our reality? And some of the videos I've seen, just so that it is an aside here, I've watched a number of videos, of course, we all have now with YouTube being so ever present in our lives, and somebody did a compilation several times of news items that were essentially the same thing, and he recorded them on all different channels, and they were saying the exact same words, so you could see that the newscasters were not being spontaneous, that they were reading from a script. And nobody questions that. So somebody above all of them is writing this, and no matter if you're watching an entertainment news magazine on TV or news or local news or national news, they're repeating the same thing, and it's really quite scary when you see them string all of these together, when each of these little clips showing them saying the same thing.
I hear you.
The exact same words, so...
I hear you.
You know what I'm saying?
I do, definitely. And that reminds me of something I've been thinking for years, at least on a level of presidents and presidential campaigns, so on and so forth. And that's the idea of the people might say, wow, I loved that speech. It was so this, it was so that. Oh my God, this president or this candidate is so incredible. And in my mind, it's been, man, you're falling in love with the speechwriter. You're falling in love with the speechwriter. Your candidate or your president didn't actually write that. Somebody sat down and figured out what the best way to say this or that was. And it's the speechwriter, people. Hello, wake up. I just had to throw that in there.
It's the same way as if you go to a restaurant these days, and it's been happening more and more lately. We used to go to a restaurant, and you would have the cooks, and you would have a waiter or a waitress, and there was no other people in between. You would give your order, and the waiter or the waitress was tipped according to how quickly it was, to ensure prompt service, by the way. Tips, that's what tips really means, to ensure prompt service. And depending on how pleasant and polite, you would tip the person. And you knew that it was basically between the cook and the waiter or the waitress. Well, you go to one of these corporate restaurants now, you have one person that will welcome you with a smile and take you to a table. You have another person that comes and takes your order for your drink, and then you have another person that comes to take your order for your food, and then you have another person that comes and brings you your food. And you say, who do you tip? It's because if one person screws up, it ruins the whole thing. And it's the way that our entire culture has become subject to this homogenized globalization, where you don't, like you said, the speechwriter is the one that's really the one that should be complimented on his speech, but then the person delivering it had to emotionally, with the emotional cadence, has to say the speech in the right way.
That's why actors
so
make the
elements.
best politicians. Okay, I had to throw another one in there. No, it's true. Actors make the best politicians. Okay, whatever.
Yes. This is, of course, why we have reality TV star in the driver's seat. And that's why we had Reagan too, because they're able to emulate what we expect. But the sad thing is that in almost everything else too, the same thing with a corporation. You watch the TV and you get a commercial that comes on, and the commercial sells you. Well, if you're so sold on it, are you really going to go and buy the product because of the product, or are you going to do it because Madison Avenue or the ad agency was able to produce a very well-crafted video, essentially a marketing tool, a commercial? Again, you can't really do that because you have to rely on so many different other elements that if one person screws up, they've screwed it up for everybody.
Sure.
And if one person does really well, he's basically carrying the whole team with him. So it's a scary thought to think of, politics is just a reflection of the rest of our reality.
And check it out. And check it out. It's like, as we know, okay, it's like people don't even expect, I mean, some do, and I don't understand that, but the promises that a politician makes while running, I mean, they're known as campaign promises. You said this, you said that, why isn't it happening? It's like usually just blown off by saying, come on, it was a campaign promise, what do you want?
Yeah, like Nancy Pelosi did when she was called on the carpet about some of the promises that Obama had made, and that if Nancy had done her job the way that it was presented she would do it, she would be able to say, no, I'm standing, the buck stops with me, I'm not going to allow a vote, or whatever. And essentially she said, well, you know how campaigns are, political promises are.
Yeah.
That's just part of a campaign. Almost as if she was saying, well, she really was saying, it doesn't really matter, does it? We sold you on the promises, and that's all that they were required for, was to secure your vote. Now that we're here, we're not really obliged to live up to them unless you want to punish us politically in 2 years by voting in our opponents. And of course, that's exactly what happened. The Congress flipped over as quickly as it had flipped for her, and her Democrats had flipped against her because they were in the driver's seat. And this was the first time that, well, of course I've always known about this in the back of my mind, but I always essentially believed that a candidate really wanted to do what he was going to say, and if he couldn't do it, he would get up and say, well, the interest of this industry or this group was too much, and the congressional people that I was relying on couldn't do it because they were in bed with this industry, or they were indebted to this other industry, so they voted against it. Well, when I found out that the public option was a very viable thing, and I was very much in support of it because I feel very strongly that the government cannot compel you to purchase, to pay for a product from somebody that's going to be making a profit on it. Because I don't think that healthcare is like that. It's like the roads. You're not supposed to be making a profit on it. Sure, you can pay a toll road until you pay off the cost to construct the bridge or whatever, or the actual highway. After a point in time, it's not there for the profit of a person or a group or a company. It's for the use of the people. Some things are basic and inalienable rights. So I found out that that Obama had publicly lied by saying to Harry Reid when he was asked about the public option, and he turned and he said, well, as long as Senator Reid here can give me a bill that I can sign with it in there, I'll be happy to. And Senator Reid then passed the buck back to him and said, well, as long as you provide me with a bill to sign that I can give you back for your signature, as long as you will do it, I will do my best. Well, then after that, I found out, and I was talking with all of the legislative aides to the senators. Well, Senator Bennett of Colorado, and I won't deliberate on this, but I just want your people to know this little particular example is how it works. So he had said, in order to get elected himself, because he had to run to fill the seat that had been vacated by Salazar, who had been tapped by Obama to head up the Department of Interior or something. Obama was basically picking his friends from the Senate and naming them to his cabinet, requiring all these special sessions or special elections to fill those vacant seats. So he said, yeah, I'm going to do this, and this is what I'm going to do, and I'm writing this letter, and I'm going to get all the other senators to sign off on it, and if we get a majority of signatures for the public option, we're going to make sure that it's in that final bill. So he says this, it's on public record, and the letter is going around, and people that were never on board with it actually ended up signing it. Well, it came to the point where we only needed like 2 more signatures, and some of the votes that were outstanding were people that had publicly come out and supported it, so it was a no-brainer. But it was taking a long time, so I started calling the offices of these senators, and I was talking with the legislative aides about it, and getting the details. Well, has the senator seen it? And one of them was Amy Klobuchar, Minnesota, and there was Jeff Bingaman from New Mexico, and there was a couple of others, and I found out that Rahm Emanuel, Obama's chief of staff, had essentially told Dick Durbin, who was the whip. The whip is the person that goes around and makes sure that everybody's going to vote the right way. And the whip was Dick Durbin, and he went to these other senators and essentially told them, even though you supported this publicly before, we don't want you to sign this, because if you guys, you 2 or 3, whatever it was, sign this, then it's going to make the president look bad, because then he'll have to include it, and since our whole bill was crafted by the insurance industry and the hospital industry and so forth and so on, we can't have this. So that was when I saw where the rubber met the road. That was my one particular experience, and I was actually talking with the people that told me how this all went down. Even for me, and I've been a veteran of the political wars as an activist for many years, that was when I actually knew that Obama had technically and unequivocally lied. It's one thing to say, this is what I will try to do if I become president. I'll do it all within my power to do it. But he didn't. He never did that. He lied about it. And that, to me, that's unforgivable. That's just that's immoral to make that kind of a lie. And he was asked about it. Somebody, as he went on the road to sell the Obamacare bill, which, as everybody knows, half the Congress couldn't even see it until right before they had to vote on it. And he was in some type of gymnasium in Indiana or Ohio or something like that. And somebody called out when everything was quiet and said, what about the public option? And Obama looked very flustered. He said, well, we tried to get it in there, and acted like, it wasn't due to him. And it was. It was definitely due to him personally. He personally ensured that it did not make it in the final bill, because the people that he made the deal with behind the curtains, they never wanted it in there. They never would have gone along with it if it was in there, because everybody would have gotten on board with the public option, and essentially we would have Medicare for all. Anyway, I'm through with that example. I just wanted to use it to illustrate how it works.
Absolutely. And, well, unfortunately, it's what I call politics as usual. There's no real surprises or shockers there for me. I'd like to just jump into another area, still totally connected. We didn't talk about this before the interview, so I'm not sure how much or how strongly you would like to comment or not. And that is, what do you foresee, anticipate? What have you heard? What do you know? Okay, Nibiru, here basically the ability for the inhabitants to actually walk among us just out in the open. What Where do you see that going, if you've given much thought to it? What have you heard? I don't know.
You mean essentially what can we anticipate going forward? What's going to be happening here?
Well, beyond
in the near future?
Beyond the cataclysmic, pole shifts and things like that, I mean, the whole idea about the inhabitants of Nibiru being able to just exert authority over the inhabitants of this planet again. Oh,
okay. Well, I know that there's this conception that we can anticipate an alien invasion of some kind. So even though there are some things that I will say are alleged, I can say with firm conviction that we are not going to face anything like a quote-unquote alien invasion the way it's commonly scripted, at least for Hollywood. Mm-hmm. The inhabitants of Nibiru, the Anunnaki, are supposedly prohibited from ever coming back to this planet, even as they pass us by. But the more wealthy among them supposedly can lift their own private rocket ships above the cloud layers to take a peek as they pass us by. But there's not going to be any interaction, supposedly, between the Anunnaki and Earthlings. So that's not something that we would have to worry about. Of course, the cataclysms themselves are going to be bad enough. That would just make everything so hopeless that it would warp the entire soul harvest. And what's the good of spending thousands and thousands of years cultivating human souls only to warp them at the last minute by having a sense of hopelessness and despair come upon them to the point where they turn their entire spiritual polarity? I don't see that happening.
What about the idea of wars between the gods, that kind of thing, where there are different mindsets as to what they actually want to do or follow or whatever?
Okay. Well, we have the two spiritual polarities. We know that, and we know that the good-hearted guys, they have an ability to understand mentally what we're thinking. The bad guys, and both of these entities, both of these races, representatives of these races, exist in fourth density. Now, supposedly the Council of Worlds edicts are they cannot unveil themselves publicly without express permission unless they are doing it to someone that is already firmly within their grasp and no one else is around to witness it. So you have the selfish guys that are very clumsy because they require basically their entire team has to be on the same page, working to wink in and out of fourth density to third density. So sometimes you will see examples where they don't do it very well and end up having humans see their ships that are not supposed to see it. And this has happened. Like, for instance, there was a ship that had mechanical problems and it was not able to get back into fourth density, and this was discovered in Russia. So by the time they got back, though, the policemen, I guess, of the cosmos of the Council of Worlds were able to come in and remove it so that there was no evidence of what had happened. But that's a rarity, and that usually happens due to the clumsiness on the part of the selfish-minded, because, once again, just like the corporations of today, in order to make things work, everybody has to work on the same page. Mm. Now, the ones that are good-hearted don't usually have that much of a problem because they're already on the same page, they want to be on the same page, and they can usually fill in the gaps as necessary. So when it comes time, I don't see the wars of the gods. We may witness them attempting to shoot each other down. This is what a lot of people think when they look up at the stars and they see what seem to be shooting stars, and there seem to be wars in the cosmos going on. And that may not be true, but from my understanding, that's not allowed to be witnessed by those on Earth. It's a very, very important stricture because, once again, the whole purpose of our reality is to take the souls off and have them debriefed and make their decisions completely with free will. If everybody knew the real truth about this all, that would warp the soul harvest. That's not going to happen up to and including the time of the actual shift and the perishing of millions and billions, really. So afterwards, we have more of a tendency, I think, to see the gods, as we would call them, because we're going to be facing an Earth that has been essentially house cleaned, and that the hybrids that have been building up in a form of stasis that are in storage waiting for this, the good-hearted people that will be coming back to repopulate Earth will be putting together these dome cities, in effect, that are going to take over the landscape amongst the primitive reality that the rest of us who have survived the pole shift will be inhabiting. And in some cases, if we're with a small group of good-hearted people and we're all on the same page and we are all of good heart, we can be invited into those dome cities. At least this is the alleged reality. Mm-hmm. And after a lot of study, I have convinced myself that is more likely to happen than it is likely to happen. We're going to have the bad guys essentially taking over and controlling wild bands of humans, a la Mad Max on Fury Road, something like that. Mm. I don't think that is going to happen.
Okay.
But it is a possibility. We don't know. But I don't foresee that scenario playing out. I think that we are going to have to do this all on our own. We're not really going to be rescued, per se, and a lot of people that think we're going to be rescued with, say, a rapture, if they're of the Christian persuasion, I'm not going to do anything to encourage such a feeling, because I consider that to be selfish for salvation. Oh, I'm going to be saved because I believe in such and such. Oh, I'm going to be saved because there's going to be a rapture, and I've already, joined the church or joined the temple or whatever, and I've said 12 Holy Marys or whatever, so I'm going to be saved. No, I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to come down to how we react with our fellow humans during these tribulations, and our souls are essentially going to be measured according to that.
Okay.
Does that get to the heart of what your question about what I foresee with the wars of God?
I do appreciate your response, and we are talking with DonDep. This is August 15th, 2016. So Don, just in closing, because as always, our time has gone by way too fast, and I'm filled with even more questions now. But in closing, any closing statements, and or when do you feel the aliens are here statement would actually be coming?
Well, I do foresee the pole shift occurring fairly soon. I do foresee the the political circus, basically being put on hold because they're going to cancel or postpone the elections. There are a number of points on which this could occur, but I do foresee that happening. I do not foresee anyone inhabiting the Oval Office, and that's going to be important because the man that's going to be responsible for essentially making sure that the public is treated equitably and fairly, many will not see it that way, he's already in charge. He's behind the scenes, and he's simply going to do what any one of us should expect them to do. I don't see the aliens as per se, the extraterrestrials, I don't see them manifesting in our reality any more than they currently are until such time as they might be called upon to prevent the theft of a nuclear weapon. They can step in and change things. They can't do anything to knock people down. They can take steps to put a stop to an electronic transmission so that such things as nuclear warheads cannot be stolen or nuclear power plants cannot be blown up, because there will be attempts by the selfish among us to try to ruin everything in that way. If they can't have their number of toys, they're going to try to make sure nobody has it, and they're going to try to take steps to do that. But because we're an electronic space opera, as the survivor of Roswell telepathically communicated to Army nurse Matilda McElroy, because we're an electronic space opera, the electronic conveyance method will be used to prohibit the worst case scenarios by these selfish humans. But they're going to try to, they're going to be desperate. They are already desperate. We can see the fraying of the establishment publicly, so anticipate even more of that going forward as we descend into this uncertainty. This is a time of high uncertainty, and we can only expect the worst. I would try to minimize that. I would tell people, don't necessarily put your faith in gold or money. You've got to make sure that you are prepared for any eventuality in case they have an announcement and the electricity is closed off and you can't even get gas at the gas pump. At least have emergency gas can of 5 gallons so you can go to where you plan on writing this out. Hopefully that's not too far. But just keep your eyes open and your ears open, as always, as all of my other fellow truth seekers would tell you if they were in my spot. That's, I think, what they would say too.
Don, thank you very much. Once again, we have here DonDep, and I do appreciate your insight, your input, your time, and this is The World According to Pleiades. Good luck to us all. Thank you for listening to The World According to Pleiades on KFUG Radio in Crescent City, California. If you have any topics you'd like covered, or you feel you have the potential to make a good interviewee, please send your suggestions and or information to KFUG Radio, 270 I Street, Crescent City, California, 95531. Attention, Pleiades. Or email me at radiointerview@moonstar-enterprises.com. That's radiointerview@moonstar-enterprises.com. My name is Pleiades Moonstar, and I love you.